He was just a struggling single dad trying to keep his little girl safe. She was a powerful CEO who didn't believe in love, only contracts. When their worlds collided over a deal neither of them expected, no one could have predicted what would happen next. Not even them. Get ready for a story of unexpected kindness, quiet strength, and a connection that might just change everything. Before we dive in, if you enjoy heartwarming stories that inspire and heal, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you won't miss a single moment. Now let's begin. Single dad agreed to a contract marriage with a cold CEO, but she cried when he asked to leave. The storm rolled over the pines like an angry beast snarling with thunder as rain pelted the narrow mountain road leading into Clearwater. Most people would have pulled over or waited it out in the nearest gas station, but Victoria Hale didn't have that luxury. Time was currency and she had none to spare. Her sleek black Tesla hissed as she navigated a sharp turn until a warning light blinked red on the dash, followed by a sputter and a sudden silent coast. "No, no, no," she muttered, tapping the steering wheel. Not now. The car slowed to a crawl and then stopped altogether on the shoulder just a mile outside town. She stared through the fogged windshield. Trees loomed on either side, dripping water like 1,000 ticking clocks. There was no cell service. Of course, she sat still, furious. In her world, plans ran on precision. She had meetings lined up back-to-back in Seattle. She was scouting a potential site for a new HaleGen Community Health Center. This was supposed to be a quiet detour. Instead, it was becoming a logistical nightmare. Victoria Hale was not a woman accustomed to being stranded, especially not alone in the woods wearing 4-inch heels and a camel-colored trench coat already soaking at the shoulders. She popped the hood, grabbed an umbrella from the back seat, and stepped out into the cold curtain of rain. The wind caught her coat as she leaned over the engine compartment, her high-fashion confidence faltering in the face of belts, tubes, and steam she couldn't diagnose. She was glaring at the mess when she heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. A beat-up silver pickup truck pulled up behind her, its headlights glowing through the rain like two eyes from a simpler world. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in work jeans and a flannel shirt under a worn brown jacket. A baseball cap shaded his eyes. He walked with a calm, unhurried gait like someone who didn't live by the hour. "You all right there, ma'am?" he called over the rain. Victoria straightened and turned. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just waiting for a tow." He gave her a knowing look, then tilted his chin toward the open hood. "Tesla, huh? She's not liking this weather." "I'm aware," she replied, sharp but not unkind. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated. Normally, she'd never say yes to a stranger on a back road, no matter how calm his voice. But her phone was useless and the downpour was getting worse. And something about the man's presence felt grounded. "Suit yourself," she said, stepping aside. He walked up, peered under the hood, and fiddled with something near the fuse box. "Flooded relays," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Should have been sealed tighter." "You know what you're doing." He smiled, just a faint curve of the mouth, like the rain didn't bother him in the slightest. "Used to work on these. My shop back in town sees them sometimes, usually after folks try to drive through puddles the size of swimming pools." He took a small screwdriver from his pocket. How he had one on him was a mystery, and tapped a housing box. The car chirped. Lights blinked. She blinked, surprised. "That actually did something." "Should get you back on the road, at least to town," he said, lowering the hood. "But I'd take it easy. Clearwater's just up ahead. Got a diner mechanic shop if you want a real look." He turned back toward his truck. "Wait," she said. He paused. She was wet, uncomfortable, still annoyed, but a strange warmth nudged at her. It wasn't the repair, it was the simplicity of what had just happened. No ask, no negotiation, just help quietly given. "Thank you," she said, softer now. "Can I pay you for your time?" He shook his head. "Just glad you're all right." "Do you always stop for strangers? Only when they look like they've never changed a tire in their life," he said with a teasing smirk. Victoria felt the laugh escape before she could suppress it. It shocked her. He walked back to his truck, opened the door, and before getting in, looked over his shoulder. "Next time you take a detour through the mountains, maybe keep some boots in the car, and an umbrella that doesn't look like it costs more than my truck." She looked down. Her designer umbrella had indeed turned inside out. Then before she could respond, he was gone. The road felt different after that. The rain had eased slightly. The car started. She sat behind the wheel watching the truck's taillights disappear around a bend. Something about him lingered, a brief warmth that hadn't come from any engine. She hadn't even gotten his name. But for the first time in a long time, Victoria Hale's CEO, perfectionist survivor, felt seen. She exhaled slowly, pulled onto the road, and drove toward town, not knowing that a man named Luke Morgan, single father of one, had just stepped quietly into her life, and that a broken-down Tesla in the rain would be the first domino in everything about to change. The polished steel elevator doors glided open on the 42nd floor of Helgen Tower, revealing a sweeping view of downtown Seattle soaked in golden morning light. Inside her glass-walled office, Victoria Hale stood, unmoving arms folded, watching the city like it was a chessboard and she the grandmaster. Except today she didn't feel in control. The envelope on her desk bore the family crest. She'd opened it an hour ago, read its contents 3 times, and still hadn't moved. Her late father's last surprise, a clause buried in the trust. In the event of my passing, the successor to Helgen Holdings shall demonstrate stability and commitment to legacy by entering into a legally binding marriage within 60 days. If this clause is not satisfied, all control and voting rights revert to the board. A marriage clause. It sounded medieval, unlawful even, but it was real. And unfortunately perfectly legal in this context, sealed with signatures and buried in family governance documents no one had questioned. Victoria pressed her fingers to her temple. The board was already sniffing for weakness. She couldn't afford scandal. She couldn't afford delay. A fake marriage to a corporate peer would only invite leaks, lawsuits, or worse, leverage against her. No, she needed someone outside the spotlight. Someone invisible to the media, irrelevant to business. Someone with no interest in her world, no desire for power. And then, like a whisper, his voice from the roadside returned. Only when they look like they've never changed a tire in their life. The man with rain in his jacket and warmth in his smile. He hadn't asked for money. He hadn't recognized her. He'd simply helped, then disappeared. She didn't know his name, but she knew where to find him. 3 days later, Victoria stood outside a modest home near the edge of Clearwater, where pine trees met weather-worn fences and wind chimes tinkled gently in the autumn breeze. It didn't feel like a place CEOs belonged. She stepped onto the porch and knocked twice. Footsteps. The door opened. It was him. He wore a soft gray hoodie and jeans speckled with paint. His hair was damp, like he'd just come in from washing the car. He looked at her the way a man might look at someone who knocked on the wrong door, polite, puzzled, and one breath away from asking if she needed directions. "You," he said. She straightened. "Me? You lost another car?" "No." She exhaled, pushing past the absurdity. "I need to talk to you. Privately." He glanced behind him, then stepped aside. "Come in." The living room was small, tidy, and warm. A girl's pink ballet shoes hung from the doorknob of a bedroom down the hall. A dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web sat on the coffee table beside a crayon drawing that said, "Daddy, you're my hero." She sat on the edge of a faded couch. "I didn't catch your name." "Luke Morgan," he said. "And I'm guessing you don't do surprise visits often." "No," she admitted. "But I don't have much time. What I'm about to say will sound absurd, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." He folded his arms. "Go ahead." Victoria took a breath. "I'm the CEO of Helgen, a biotech company headquartered in Seattle. My father passed away last month. In his final estate documents, he included a clause that requires me to be married within 60 days or I lose control of the company." Luke blinked. "Okay, I need a legal documented marriage. One that looks legitimate on paper and to the board. I don't want someone from my world, someone who would use it for leverage. I need someone neutral, uninterested, private." His brows furrowed. "And you think I'm that someone? You helped me without asking for anything? That's rare." I remembered that. "I had someone look into you. You're a widower, a father. You work hard, you're respected, and you live away from public noise. You're safe." He laughed softly, the sound surprised but not mocking. "So this is what a contract marriage?" "Yes, 6 months. I'll provide full legal terms, financial compensation, complete privacy. You won't have to relocate unless you choose to. And your daughter Emily Wright would be cared for as well. Luke's expression darkened at the mention of Emily. You had someone look into my daughter? She didn't flinch. I'm thorough, not reckless. I wouldn't come to you if I didn't believe you could walk away whole. He stood and paced once, rubbing his jaw. This is the most insane thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm aware. And what makes you think I'd say yes, I don't, she said honestly. But I needed to ask. Because I'd rather trust a decent man I barely know than a polished viper I know too well. He turned to her, eyes serious now. I have a daughter. I don't bring strangers into her world. She wouldn't need to know the truth. As far as she's concerned, it's a private relationship between adults. I'd respect her space. He looked down at the crayon drawing on the table, then out the window toward the gravel driveway where his truck sat parked. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. I swore I wouldn't bring chaos into this house. Victoria's voice softened. Then let me be clear, this isn't chaos. It's controlled, timed, temporary. 6 months and you walk away better off than before? He didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then quietly he asked, do you even believe in marriage? She paused. I believe in strategy, she said. But lately, I'm starting to hope there's more. Luke watched her for a long moment, then nodded once curtly. I need a few days. Of course. As she left the house, the wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. She stepped into her car, hands trembling just slightly on the wheel. For a woman who calculated every move, what she'd just done was unthinkable. But in a world ruled by power and pretense, something about Luke Morgan had reminded her of what real strength looked like. She didn't know it yet, but this stranger, this single dad with paint on his jeans and grief in his eyes, was about to challenge everything she thought she knew about love, family, and the meaning of home. And she had no idea that by offering him a contract, she just invited her own heart into the deal. The world always felt quieter in the early mornings of Clearwater. Dew clung to the edges of Luke's front porch, glistening like glass beads on the railing, as Emily hummed to herself, drawing chalk flowers on the driveway. Luke stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, eyes distant. He hadn't slept much. Victoria's offer spun around his head like a wheel that refused to stop turning. A contract marriage. 6 months of pretending, the very idea seemed absurd. Except it wasn't. Not when he looked at the unopened bill on the kitchen counter, the one from the dentist's office with Emily's name on it, and a cost they could barely cover, even with his weekend hours at the auto shop. He hated the thought of accepting help like that. But this wasn't a handout. It was a trade. And something else, something more subtle, had caught him off guard. That woman, that CEO, was steel in her posture and storm clouds in her eyes. She'd sat on his worn couch with perfect posture, but honest words. She didn't pity him. She didn't talk down to him. She just asked and left space for him to choose. That in itself was rare. He stepped outside and called for Emily. Time to get ready, Bug. We've got school. Okay, Daddy, she chirped, standing and dusting off her jeans. Her laughter echoed against the trees. Luke watched her run inside the picture of joy. She was his compass. If he said yes to this deal, it would be for her future. But it would also be because just once he wanted to believe someone like Victoria Hale might not be as far from his world as she seemed. 3 days later, Luke stood in the downtown Seattle office of Halegen Legal, his signature drying on thick linen paper. He hadn't brought Emily. Victoria sat across from him in a tailored navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression unreadable. A lawyer in a gray tie recited the terms again. Duration, financial sum conditions for privacy, and exit clause. No intimacy required. No obligations beyond public appearances and cohabitation in a secure residence owned by the Hale Trust. When it was done, the lawyer collected the pages and left the room. Luke remained seated, his hands folded loosely. Victoria looked at him carefully. Are you sure you're all right with all of this? He tilted his head slightly. Does anyone ever feel all right about pretending to be married to a stranger? A flicker of something amusement touched her lips. I suppose not, but I signed, which means I'm in. So, what's next? We move you in. This weekend, I've prepared a guest suite on the 2nd floor. You'll have your own space. Emily's room is next door. I had it furnished with what I think a child her age might like. Luke narrowed his eyes. You furnished a room for her? She'll be living there. she said simply. I wanted it to feel kind. The words settled into the room like a warm breeze through a crack in the window. Luke didn't reply right away. He looked around the office glass steel order. Her world. He didn't belong here, not really. And yet she was making room for his daughter. That counted for something. I'll talk to Emily, he said at last. Tell her it's a move, a job opportunity. Nothing more. She won't need to lie. She won't need the truth either. Victoria nodded slowly. Understood. Saturday morning, the moving truck rolled into the circular driveway of Victoria's lakeside estate on the edge of the city. Luke drove the truck himself. He didn't trust movers with Emily's drawings or the old rocking chair that had once belonged to his wife's grandmother. The house was stunning. All clean lines, soft wood tones, and wide windows that drank in the water view. Emily pressed her hands to the glass and whispered, Daddy, it's like a castle. Victoria greeted them at the door. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, casual, almost ordinary if not for the poised way she held herself. Welcome, she said, offering a small smile. Emily, your room is upstairs. Second door on the right. The girl turned to her father for permission. Luke nodded. Go check it out, Bug. When she dashed upstairs, Victoria turned to Luke. Come, I'll show you around. The tour was brief and efficient. Kitchen, library, back deck, pantry, security panel. She didn't try to impress him. Just explained where things were and how they worked like someone showing a tenant around a guest house. Except this wasn't just a house, it was her life. And she was opening it quietly, deliberately. They ended the tour in the living room where Emily had already found the built-in window seat and was curled up with a book. I'll make dinner tonight, Victoria said. Luke raised an eyebrow. You cook, I follow recipes. I make no promises, he chuckled. Fair enough. She hesitated. Luke, I know this arrangement is strange. I know it goes against everything familiar. But I want you to know I'll respect your space, your boundaries, your daughter's well-being. This isn't a trap. You can always walk away. He studied her, really studied her for the first time. There were tired edges behind her confidence, something deeper in her gaze, something that looked a lot like fear hidden beneath ambition. I appreciate that, he said softly, but I'm not planning to run. That night dinner was a quiet affair. Victoria's attempt at baked ziti turned out better than expected, though Luke offered to cook next time. Emily talked about school and how she wanted to plant sunflowers in the garden if they were going to stay a while. At one point, Luke looked over and saw Victoria listening, really listening to Emily talk about art and music and space unicorns. And she smiled. Not a forced one. Not a polite CEO smile. A real, unguarded smile. It hit Luke harder than he expected. He didn't love her. He barely knew her. But in that moment, something stirred. Not romance, not desire, but recognition. Of someone else quietly doing their best. Of a woman who was braver than she looked and more alone than she'd admit. Later that night, as Luke stood on the balcony outside his new room, watching the water reflect the stars, he thought again about the paper he'd signed, the rules they'd agreed to, and how rules never quite covered the parts of life that mattered most. He wasn't sure where this was headed, but for now they were under the same roof. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. The scent of fresh pancakes drifted through the air like a slow song on Sunday morning. Luke stood by the stove, flipping another golden round onto the growing stack, his sleeves rolled up, hair tousled from sleep. Across the kitchen island, Emily was busy pouring maple syrup into a tiny ramekin, her feet swinging from the bar stool. The sun had just begun to stream through the lake-facing windows, casting a soft glow on the pine cabinetry and stone countertops, luxury materials Luke never imagined touching in his life, much less using to make breakfast. Victoria Hale emerged from the hallway, her steps nearly silent. She wore a satin robe over fitted loungewear hair, brushed back into a sleek ponytail. To Luke, she looked like she belonged on the cover of some upscale design magazine, perfectly poised even in quiet moments. Good morning, she said, her voice lower in the early hour, almost warm. Morning, Luke replied, tilting the pan for one final pancake. Coffee's brewed. Real stuff, none of that capsule nonsense. Victoria raised an eyebrow as she crossed to the machine, eyeing the French press with mild curiosity. Impressive. I brought it from home, he said, sliding a plate toward her. Didn't trust whatever alien contraption you had hiding in that cabinet. Emily giggled behind her orange juice. Victoria poured herself a cup and sipped carefully, her lips parting in the smallest expression of approval. It's good. Luke turned back to the stove. You sound surprised. I'm not used to someone else making coffee for me. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Then you've been hanging around the wrong people. There was a pause, the kind of pause that lingered, not awkward, but aware. Then Victoria turned her attention to Emily. Did you sleep well? Yes, Emily beamed. Your house is so big. I got a little lost going to the bathroom last night, but then I remembered the pink flower door is mine. Victoria smiled. That door was your idea. Really, I had the decorators paint 3 options. Yours was the one I liked most, but now I see it was meant for you. Luke watched quietly as Emily blushed with pride. Victoria wasn't trying to impress her. She was simply present, and that mattered. Later that afternoon, while Emily was at a local art workshop, Luke and Victoria found themselves alone in the garden. It was Victoria's idea, a walk to clear her head before a late Zoom call. Luke followed her down the gravel path that wound through manicured hedges and stone planters. This doesn't feel real sometimes, he said, hands in his jacket pockets. I mean, this house, these grounds, this whole setup. Feels like I'm inside a TV show. Victoria looked ahead, her expression unreadable. That's funny, because I've spent most of my life feeling like I'm watching one. Luke slowed his steps. What do you mean I've learned how to play the part? The suit, the posture, the decisions. But it's always been a performance. Even at home growing up, being Victoria Hale wasn't optional. It was survival. Luke was silent, listening. She continued, her voice softer now. My father didn't raise daughters. He raised successors. I was the one who didn't break. That made me valuable. Luke's jaw tightened slightly. You say that like it was a good thing? It kept me alive, she said plainly. But it didn't leave much room for breakfast pancakes or bedtime stories. He looked at her closely. For the first time, he saw not the CEO, but the child behind the glass. Maybe that's why Emily caught you off guard. Victoria's eyes flicked to him. She did. She's not trying to impress anyone. She just loves freely. Most kids do. I didn't. That's not your fault. She looked away toward the lake. The water shimmered, still and deep. You know, I expected this arrangement to be clinical, a transaction. But now I wake up and hear your daughter humming while she brushes her teeth. I drink real coffee and eat breakfast with people I didn't hire. It's unsettling. Luke let out a dry laugh. Unsettling. That's one word for it. I mean it, she said. It's hard to trust something that doesn't come with strings. Luke turned toward her, his voice gentler now. Maybe that's the point. Not everything worth keeping needs to be controlled. They stood in silence as the wind brushed past them, rustling the trees. Then Victoria said, would it be all right if I picked Emily up today? From her class, Luke looked surprised. You want to? I think she'd like it. And I want her to see I'm trying. Luke nodded slowly. She'll love that. Victoria had never stepped into an art center before, not one, with peeling paint and old folding chairs. But as she entered the room that afternoon, she felt something shift inside her. Children laughed. Paint splattered. Glitter was everywhere. Emily was sitting cross-legged on the floor, painting a cardboard castle. When she looked up and saw Victoria, her eyes lit up. You came, I did, Victoria said, crouching down in her designer heels with surprising ease. I heard you built a kingdom. Emily held up a glitter-covered tube. It even has a tower for Dad. Victoria smiled. I'd love to see it. Later, when they got into the car, Emily slipped her hand into Victoria's without thinking. Victoria looked down at the tiny fingers curled around hers, and for a moment she forgot it was pretend. That evening, Luke noticed something new. As they sat together on the back patio, Emily inside watching a movie, Victoria wasn't on her phone. She wasn't taking calls. She was sipping tea and watching the stars come out. How was pickup, he asked. She showed me her castle, Victoria said, and told me she wants to be a glitter engineer when she grows up. Luke laughed. That sounds about right. Victoria looked at him. She trusts so easily. She's been through enough not to waste time doubting. There was silence again. Then she said quietly, Thank you for letting me in. Luke looked at her. Really looked. You're not just in, he said. You're showing up. That counts more than you think. Victoria held his gaze. And for the first time since they'd signed that contract, they both realized maybe this wasn't a transaction anymore. Maybe it was the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. The call came just past noon on a Tuesday. Luke was underneath a vintage Chevy in the corner of Clearwater's small garage, wrench in hand, when his phone buzzed in his back pocket. He slid out on the dolly, wiped his hands on a rag, and glanced at the screen. Westbrook Elementary. His heart skipped a beat. "This is Luke Morgan," he answered, voice tight. "Mr. Morgan, this is Nurse Halpern. Emily had a fall during recess. She tripped running up the playground stairs. She's all right, but she scraped her knee pretty badly and was shaken up. We'd like someone to pick her up early." Luke's stomach twisted. "I'm on my way." He grabbed his jacket and keys without thinking, but just as he reached for his truck door, another thought struck Victoria. She had taken the morning off to work from home. Her meeting wasn't until 2. She was 20 minutes closer to the school than he was. Without giving himself a chance to second-guess, Luke dialed her number. Victoria had never broken a rule she'd set for herself. Not once. But when the phone rang and Luke's name flashed on the screen, she answered it without hesitation. "She fell," she repeated, already reaching for her car keys. "Is she bleeding?" "No stitches. Just shaken." "I'm still across town if you can get there sooner." "I'm on it," she said, grabbing her coat. She hung up before he could respond. Victoria arrived at the school in record time. In the nurse's office, she found Emily sitting on the cot with a lollipop in hand and eyes red-rimmed from crying. Her scraped knee was bandaged, but her usual spark had dimmed. When Emily saw Victoria, her lower lip trembled. "I didn't mean to fall," she whispered. "Oh, sweetheart," Victoria said, kneeling down without thinking. "It's okay. Everyone falls." Emily's little arms wrapped around her neck like a vine, desperate for something solid. And Victoria froze just for a second. Then she melted. She held the child against her shoulder, a small warm weight pressed to her chest, and for the first time in her adult life, she wept. The nurse, startled, offered a tissue, but Victoria waved her off with a quiet nod. The tears weren't from panic or guilt or anything she could name. They were from something deeper. Some unseen reservoir cracked open by the sight of this small girl who had trusted her so completely, so instinctively. Emily whispered, "Are you crying just a little?" Victoria murmured. "Because I'm glad you're okay." The girl nestled in closer, and that was the moment something broke open in Victoria Hale, a place long boarded up. Not out of malice, but out of necessity. Luke arrived 20 minutes later to find Victoria sitting on the cot with Emily asleep against her shoulder. He stopped in the doorway, quietly watching. She didn't see him right away. Her hand was stroking Emily's back gently, rhythmically, her expression soft in a way Luke had never seen before. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy. "She's all right," she whispered. Luke stepped closer. "Thank you." She was scared. "I think I was too." He didn't ask why she'd cried. He didn't need to. He could see it in her, the layers peeling back one at a time, revealing not weakness, but humanity. Victoria slowly stood cradling Emily as if she weighed nothing. "Can you take her?" Luke nodded and gently took the sleeping girl into his arms. She murmured his name, then settled against his chest. They walked out together, silent. Back at the house, Emily napped in her room. Victoria stood in the kitchen with a glass of water she hadn't touched. Luke leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You were good with her. I didn't feel good. I felt unprepared." "That's parenting," he said. "Even for the real ones." She gave a dry laugh. "You make it look easy. It's not. But I had no choice. When Emma, my wife, passed, it was just Emily and me. I fumbled a lot. Burnt dinners, missed ballet rehearsals, slept through school meetings, but I showed up." Victoria looked at him. "And that's enough," Luke shrugged. "Kids don't need perfection. They need presence." She looked down at the water in her glass. "I don't remember anyone ever showing up for me," she said softly. Luke's voice dropped. "That's probably why you're so good at standing on your own. But I'm tired of standing alone." There it was, the words she hadn't meant to say, the truth she hadn't realized she'd been holding back. Luke didn't rush to answer. He just nodded slowly. "Then don't." She met his gaze. "It's not that simple." Maybe not, but it's not impossible either. Something in her face cracked, not broken, but opening like ice thawing under morning sun. She stepped back from the counter, needing space. "I'm going to lie down for a while," she said. Luke watched her go. He didn't follow, but for the first time he didn't feel like a guest in her house. He felt like he belonged. That night the air was cooler. A storm whispered somewhere out on the lake, just distant enough to stir the wind. Luke sat by the fire pit outside, a blanket around his shoulders. Victoria joined him without asking, a cup of tea in her hand. For a while neither spoke. Then she asked, "When did you know you could love again?" Luke didn't answer right away. He watched the flames lick at the logs, shadows dancing across the stones. "I didn't," he said finally. "I just knew I wanted to feel something again, even if it hurt." She turned to look at him. "I'm not ready," she said. He nodded. "I'm not asking you to be, but I'm curious about what it would feel like to be held, to be seen." He met her eyes. "You're already seen." The words landed gently, not as flirtation, not as comfort, but as truth. Victoria looked back at the fire. For once she didn't need to speak, and for once someone was sitting beside her who didn't require her to. And in that quiet beneath the stars and above the lingering ache of memory, two people once strangers began to understand what it meant to slowly, tenderly fall into something real. It was late September when the seasons began to turn the air cooling enough to justify sweaters and the scent of cinnamon slipping into everything from candles to coffee. At the Hale estate, the trees along the lakeside blushed into gold and scarlet. The house no longer felt cavernous. It felt lived in. Luke stood in the hallway one morning watching Victoria struggle with a stubborn zipper on Emily's new ballet dress. "Hold still," Victoria said, brow furrowed, fingers fumbling. "This thing is like dressing a snake." Emily giggled, twisting to look up at her. "You're better at coding than clothes, huh?" Luke leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "She's got a point. I can terminate a billion-dollar contract with 3 lines of legalese," Victoria muttered. "But I'm losing a battle to glitter tool." "Here," Luke said, walking over. Their hands brushed as he took over the zipper. "You get the shoes." She looked at him, something unspoken warming her gaze, then nodded and knelt to help Emily slip on her flats. It was a quiet, domestic moment. Unremarkable, really. But to Victoria it felt monumental. Because for the first time since signing the contract, she'd stopped thinking about it. She had forgotten she was playing a part. That evening after Emily's ballet class, they went out for dinner, something casual. A local diner in town, the kind with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. No one looked twice at them. To everyone else, they were just another family out on a Friday night. Emily was busy coloring the kids' menu while Luke sipped iced tea and scanned the specials. Victoria watched them both, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. It wasn't new, but tonight it was louder. "You know," Luke said, setting his glass down, "you've been different lately." Victoria blinked. "Different how less?" "CEO. More human." She raised a brow. "Is that a compliment or a red flag?" "Compliment," he said, smiling. "You laugh more. You listen. You ask about my day now." She tilted her head. "You noticed I'd be blind not to." She looked away, a blush threatening to betray her calm. "I guess I stopped fighting the quiet." He nodded. "Sometimes quiet's where the real stuff lives." They shared a glance across the table, brief but electric. Then Emily interrupted with a proud announcement that she had colored the entire octopus pink because she's fabulous. Victoria laughed, and it wasn't forced. Luke smiled to himself. He liked that sound. He wanted more of it. Later that night, back at the house, Luke poured himself a glass of water in the kitchen. Victoria entered a moment later, barefoot, holding a thick folder. "I found something today," she said. "In the archives." Luke raised an eyebrow. "You guys have archives, of course," she replied. "We're a billion-dollar company. And also, my father liked paper." She opened the folder and handed him a letter yellowed with time. It was handwritten, gentle, unlike anything he imagined coming from a corporate executive. "I didn't know he'd written this," Victoria said. "It was addressed to my mother." Luke read silently. The letter spoke of dreams, regret, hope for their daughter, a longing to be present but admitting he didn't know how. It ended with a single line. "I hope one day she finds a man who makes her feel safe enough to be herself." Luke looked up. Victoria's expression was unreadable. I used to think I hated him, she whispered, for making me cold, for teaching me that emotions were liabilities. You don't anymore, I'm learning that, maybe. He just didn't know how to love out loud. And I inherited that silence. Luke set the letter down carefully. You're not silent anymore. They stood there a heartbeat too long, and something shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Then Victoria stepped back, clearing her throat. I should sleep. Luke nodded, of course, but neither of them moved. Finally, she said, tomorrow's the fall fair in town. Emily's been talking about it all week. Yeah, Luke said. She wants to win a goldfish. Would you, Victoria, pause searching? Would you go with us as, not just Emily's dad, but as part of the U.S.? She sees Luke's chest tightened, not with pressure, but with something tender and dangerous. Hope. I'd like that, he said, and for once they didn't need a script. The next day was golden and crisp, the fair buzzing with Life Caramel Apple's Ferris wheels and the shriek of kids chasing each other through hay bales. Luke held Emily's hand as she tugged him toward the ring toss booth. Victoria followed close behind, a knit scarf around her neck, sunglasses perched on her head, looking effortlessly elegant among the hay and noise. They laughed. They lost at every game. Emily won a plush turtle, which she declared was now her emotional support turtle. They ate too much cotton candy and drank cider that steamed in their palms. And then as the sun began to set and the sky turned amber, they stood watching Emily ride the carousel, her hair-blowing face beaming. Luke glanced at Victoria. She was watching Emily too, but her eyes weren't guarded. They were full of something soft and searching. I've been thinking, she said without turning, about how long we've been doing this. Almost 2 months, he replied. It feels longer, and also somehow not long enough. Luke didn't reply. Sometimes, she said, I catch myself thinking this is real. He looked at her, then really looked. And when you do, does it scare you? She nodded barely. Terrifies me. Luke exhaled. Me too. They stood in the falling dusk, shoulders almost touching. Then Emily ran up her cheeks, flushed with joy. That was the best day ever, Luke scooped her up. Yeah, better than Glitter Castle Day. Way better. Victoria looked at them both. Luke's steady arms, Emily's unfiltered joy, and something broke free inside her. A silent realization she couldn't unthink. She didn't want this to end. Not in 6 weeks. Not in 6 months. And maybe neither did he. Rain pattered gently against the windows of the Hale estate. It wasn't a heavy storm, just a quiet drizzle, the kind that invited introspection and long silences between sips of tea. Victoria stood in her home office staring at a box labeled personal. It had sat untouched on the top shelf of the built-in cabinets since the day she'd moved into the house. She wasn't sure what drew her to it now, perhaps the stillness of the morning, or the way Emily had kissed her on the cheek that morning, with the ease of someone who believed in safety. Or perhaps it was the carousel yesterday. The way Luke had looked at her, not with admiration or curiosity, but with knowing. Like he saw the parts of her she hadn't even shown herself. She brought the box down, dusted off the lid, and opened it. Inside were old photos, journals, faded stationery, and a letter, its envelope yellowing, edges curled. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. To Victoria, for when you're ready to understand. Mom. Her throat tightened. She'd never seen this before. It must have been left for her after her mother passed, long before her father's death. She'd assumed, like always, that her mother had simply left without much to say. But here it was. Hands trembling, she opened it. My darling Victoria, if you're reading this, it means you've lived long enough to reach a point I never could. A woman standing in her own strength, not her father's shadow. I want to tell you the truth about me and about the girl you were never allowed to be. Your father loved you in the only way he knew how, through achievement, through power. He raised you to survive. But I watched you every night from the doorway, building paper cities, singing under your breath, crying when you thought no one heard. I saw a little girl with a heart too big to be caged in steel. I wanted to protect that girl. I couldn't. I failed you in that. But if there's still any part of her left inside you, don't shut her away. Let her be loved. Let her play. Let her choose softness, not just strength. You don't owe anyone a fortress. I love you. I never stopped. Mom. By the time Victoria finished reading, her cheeks were wet. Her hands clenched the letter like a lifeline she hadn't known she was drowning without. For years, she had built herself into an unbreakable version of the woman she thought she needed to be, and now her mother's words cracked that armor, not with pain, but with permission. She sat down at her desk, the letter still in her lap, and stared out the window at the rain. She didn't want this life of cold perfection anymore. And the truth was, she hadn't wanted it for weeks. That evening, Victoria found Luke on the back porch, fixing the broken hinge of the screen door. His sleeves were rolled, fingers deft, and sure a pencil tucked behind one ear. Emily was inside baking cookies, supervised loosely by one of the housekeepers. Victoria stepped outside the cool air, brushing her cheeks. "I need to tell you something." Luke looked up. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then handed him the letter. He read in silence. No interruptions, no questions. When he finished, he held it like something sacred. "She left this for you?" Victoria nodded. "I didn't know. I thought she just faded away. Like everything else, I didn't have time to feel." Luke studied her face. That last line, he said quietly, the part about not owing anyone a fortress. That hit me too. She swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a fortress anymore." Luke took a step closer. "Then don't." "I'm scared. I know. But I also," her voice broke, "I think I want to be seen. Not for what I've built, but for who I am." Luke reached out, brushing his fingers gently against hers. "You're already being seen. You've been seen for a long time now." She looked down, then up into his eyes. "What if it's too late?" "It's never too late to let someone in." They stood like that for a moment, closer than ever, but still held back by the weight of their unspoken truths. Then Emily burst out the back door, covered in flour and joy. "The cookies are burning," she cried dramatically. Luke and Victoria sprang into action, running into the kitchen with matching urgency. They pulled the tray from the oven, singed but salvageable. Emily laughed so hard she dropped her spoon. Victoria turned to Luke with a grin. Crisis averted. "You've got to teach her oven basics," he teased. "Me," Victoria scoffed. "You're the one who made banana pancakes without measuring anything." Emily piped up. "That's his superpower." Victoria smiled. "Then what's mine?" Emily tilted her head, being soft and brave. That froze them both. Victoria looked at Luke. He smiled. She knelt down to Emily's level. "Where did you learn that?" "You," Emily said, matter of fact. "Today." That night, after Emily went to bed, Victoria wandered into the living room to find Luke still there, flipping through a photo album she didn't remember putting on the shelf. It must have been one of the few she hadn't thrown away. He pointed to a picture of Victoria as a young girl, braces, messy hair, holding a violin too big for her frame. "Did you play for 4 years?" she said, sitting beside him. "I stopped after a recital where I messed up the solo." My father didn't say a word on the drive home. Just silence. Cold, endless silence. Luke shook his head. "You were just a kid." "I stopped being a kid early." He looked at her. "But you're finding her again." "Aren't you?" She nodded slowly. "I think so." And there in that quiet house, with the scent of burned cookies still hanging in the air, they let the silence stretch between them, not as distance, but as connection. Not as armor, but as trust. Victoria leaned her head lightly against Luke's shoulder, and for the first time in her life, she didn't flinch when someone stayed. The sound of applause echoed through the banquet hall like gentle waves against polished marble. The annual Hail Gen Foundation Gala was in full swing, with glasses clinking, soft jazz humming, and the city's most powerful donors swaying in sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos. Victoria stood near the podium, flanked by a group of board members offering polite nods and controlled smiles. Her sapphire gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, but her mind wasn't on the event. It was on the man adjusting his daughter's dress near the coat room. Luke. He looked every bit out of place in a suit he'd reluctantly borrowed from her stylist team, black, clean cut, but slightly tight around the shoulders. Emily wore a pale pink dress, spinning in circles nearby, her laughter an echo of everything real in a room that so often felt hollow. Victoria had brought them tonight, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Something she hadn't named yet. But the world noticed. "Is that the husband?" one woman whispered behind a wineglass. "I heard he's a mechanic," another murmured. "That's not just a +1. That child's clearly hers." Look how they touch. The words weren't cruel. Not exactly, but they were watching. And in Victoria's world, eyes meant consequences. Still, she didn't retreat. She walked across the room and stood beside Luke. "You clean up well," she said, her voice soft. He smiled, adjusting his collar. "These shoes feel like punishment. They're designer. They're unnatural." She chuckled, then turned serious. "Thank you for coming." He glanced around. "You sure you want me here? I don't want to pretend anymore," she said. "At least not with you." He held her gaze. "Then don't." At that moment, Emily ran up, holding a small program booklet. "There's a violin performance," she squealed. "Can we stay?" Victoria smiled gently. "I think we have to now." The program resumed, and Victoria took the stage for her keynote. She stood under the spotlight, 1,000 eyes fixed on her. But for once, she wasn't thinking about headlines or quarterly margins. She thought about her mother's letter, about pancakes in the morning, about Emily's scraped knee and the warmth of Luke's hand on her back when she hadn't known she needed it. She glanced at them front row center, and she spoke. "When we talk about legacy," she began, "we often speak in numbers, in empires, in what's been built. But legacy, I've come to learn, is not just about what we create, it's about what we choose to nurture." There was a murmur of curiosity in the room. "In the past year, I've made decisions that looked from the outside like strategy, business. But the truth is, I've been learning to trust again, to feel again, to rediscover the parts of myself I thought I'd buried beneath ambition." Her voice softened. "And that's because of two people sitting in this room tonight. One who reminded me how brave it is to love, and one who showed me how simple joy can rewrite the story of a hardened heart." Gasps rippled quietly through the audience. Whispers followed. She smiled. "I didn't plan to say this, but maybe that's the point. The best things in life aren't scripted." She stepped back from the mic. "And Luke, awkward, humble, honest." Luke stood with Emily and applauded the only two people in the room who weren't thinking about headlines. They were just proud, and that was everything. But the press naturally was less tender. The following morning, headlines lit up every business blog and gossip column alike. Victoria Hale's surprise family reveal shocks. Gala from Wall Street to Main Street. The man beside the tech queen, fairy tale or facade. Luke sat on the front steps of the house, scrolling through his phone, lips tight. Victoria joined him, handing him coffee. "You saw it," she said quietly. "Yep. They'll twist it for a while. It'll pass." Luke set the phone down. "They're not just twisting you, Vic. They're twisting me. Us. I know. I didn't sign up for attention. No one ever really does." He looked at her, frustration flickering in his eyes. "They're calling me a beard, a placeholder, a PR stunt." Victoria's jaw tensed. "I'll handle it. You shouldn't have to. But I will." He exhaled. "I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at how fast people are to define what they don't understand." She sat beside him. "So don't let them define it." He glanced at her. "What does that mean?" "It means, if this is real for us, then we're not pretending anymore. Not even quietly." Luke looked at her, long searching. "Are you saying you want this to be real?" "I'm saying I don't want to go back to the way it was before you and Emily walked into my world." Silence fell between them. Then Luke said carefully, "The contract ends in 6 weeks." Victoria nodded. "It does. And then I want to renegotiate. Not with lawyers. With you." Luke gave a half smile. "What's your offer?" She reached over, took his hand. Not perfection, not headlines. Just mornings, dinner tables, backyard swings, pancake Sundays, messy, honest life. He laced his fingers through hers. "And I get to keep your daughter as my glitter advisor. She'd be devastated if you didn't." That afternoon, Victoria released a statement, short, graceful, powerful. "To those speculating about my personal life, my choices are mine. The people in my life are not props. They're home. That's all the statement I need to make." The gossip began to quiet, not because the world stopped watching, but because she stopped flinching. And Luke, he stopped worrying, because in a world that had once chewed him up and spit him out, he had found one thing no camera could fake: a woman who didn't need him to prove himself, only to be himself. And for the first time in a long, long time, that was enough. The sun slipped low behind the lake, casting a warm amber hue over the backyard. Autumn had settled in for good now, leaves crisp to the color of copper and gold. Emily's rubber boots tracking tiny trails across the lawn as she hunted for pine cones in the waning light. Victoria stood at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled, rinsing dishes with an ease that surprised even her. Behind her, Luke dried a plate, flipping the dish towel over his shoulder like he'd been doing this for years. The silence between them was the kind that only grew between people who'd grown used to sharing space, not awkward, but familiar. She glanced over her shoulder. "You're good at that." "What dishes?" he smirked. "It's part of the dad's starter pack." She grinned. "Well, you've got an excellent technique. Precision. Efficiency." "I try." He reached for the next plate but paused when he saw her watching him. Something flickered between them, unspoken, tender, unfinished. Victoria set the sponge down slowly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask me anything." She turned to face him fully, the water still running behind her. "Do you remember the first moment you started to feel something real?" Between us, Luke looked at her, the towel hanging forgotten in his hand. "You mean besides the time you threatened to have me legally bound to a 6-month contract if I didn't marry you?" She laughed, a soft, surprised laugh, and the sound made his chest ache in the best way. "I mean after that," she said. He set the towel down. "I think it was the day Emily fell and you were the one who showed up. The way you held her, the way you fell apart when you realized she trusted you. That did something to me." He stepped closer. "And you." She swallowed, her voice quieter. "It was the night you sat outside with me after her bedtime. We didn't talk much, but for the first time in years, I felt like I didn't have to pretend I wasn't lonely. And you didn't try to fix it. You just stayed." Luke's eyes softened. Sometimes staying is the bravest thing. The moment stretched. She took a slow step toward him. "I don't want to pretend anymore," she whispered. He met her halfway. "We're not pretending." Her fingers brushed his. "But we started this whole thing on a contract." "I know." She hesitated. "What if, when the contract ends, you realize this was all proximity circumstance?" He leaned closer, voice low and certain. "Then why do I miss you every time you leave the room?" Her breath caught. "I've been afraid," she said, "of getting used to this, of needing something that might not last." "You're allowed to need things," he said gently. "You're allowed to be human." She blinked fast. "What if I'm not good at love?" Luke reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then let's be bad at it together. But let's be real." She closed the final inch between them, resting her forehead against his. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was the kind of nearness that only happened when hearts agreed before lips did. Outside, Emily's voice rang out. "I found 3 pine cones." "That's a personal record." Victoria laughed against his chest. Luke smiled, stepping back with a quiet chuckle. "She keeps us grounded," he said. "She keeps us honest," Victoria added. They both turned toward the back door as Emily burst in, holding a handful of pine cones with the pride of a treasure hunter. "I'm making decorations for the Thanksgiving table," she announced. "You're a little early," Luke said, taking one of the pine cones and inspecting it. "I like to be prepared," she said with mock solemnity. Victoria crouched down. "How about we bake something together tomorrow? You, me, and Luke. A practice pie." Emily grinned. "With cinnamon? Of course. And glitter." "Let's keep the glitter off the pie," Luke said quickly. They all laughed. That night, after Emily was tucked in the house, fell into a soft hush. Victoria stood by the fireplace, watching the embers fade. Luke joined her, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "I talked to my lawyer today," she said. His brow lifted. "About the contract." Luke's face grew still. "Is something wrong?" She shook her head. "No. It's, expiring in 3 weeks." He nodded, cautious now. She continued. "I asked what would happen if we just dissolved it quietly. No press, no fanfare. Just let it end." Luke's voice was low. "Do you want to end it?" Victoria turned to him fully. "I want to end the contract." He didn't speak. "I want to end the contract," she repeated, "because I want us to be real. No paperwork, no obligations. Just us." He exhaled slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I was hoping you'd say that. She stepped closer, took his mug set, both down, then placed her hands on his chest. Luke. Yeah. If I tell you I've fallen for you, completely inconveniently and without permission, would you still stay? He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation. I already did. And then finally their lips met, not rushed, not dramatic, but gently, deeply, like a truth spoken without words. Outside, the wind stirred the trees and the stars blinked quietly above the lake. Inside, two people who had once signed their names on a cold piece of paper now stood wrapped in something far warmer, far braver. Not a contract, a beginning. Rain pelted the windows like 1,000 soft knocks, each one echoing louder than it should have. Luke stood by the edge of the lake, hands in his jacket pockets, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled of cedar and distance. Behind him, the lights of the house still glowed warmly, so different from how it had once felt. Back then, it had been a fortress. Now it felt like a place someone had tried to turn into a home. Tried because suddenly Luke wasn't sure if he belonged anymore. The contract would expire in 3 days. 3. And while they had crossed that boundary into something far beyond paperwork, into shared breakfasts and real laughter and soft declarations, whispered between sips of tea, it didn't erase the reality that had built it all in the first place. A deal, an expiration date, and a woman whose world might never fully have room for a man like him. Inside, Victoria sat at the long oak dining table, the legal envelope unopened before her. It had arrived that morning, final dissolution paperwork. Neutral, clean, unemotional. Everything it should be. Everything she didn't feel. She glanced at the piano across the room. Emily had played her improvised Sunshine song on it just last night, Luke clapping along with exaggerated cheer. Victoria had laughed so hard her stomach hurt. She hadn't laughed like that in years. And now her hands trembled, because she could feel the change in Luke, the distance he tried to mask with warm smiles, the way his shoulders tensed when she mentioned Seattle, the way he had started asking about moving back to Clearwater. She wanted to stop it, to say stay, but a voice inside whispered, maybe you don't get to keep something you started with a lie. She picked up the envelope, then slowly set it down again. That night the wind howled stronger. Emily was already asleep upstairs, her plush turtle tucked under one arm. Luke and Victoria sat on the living room floor beside the firebacks, resting against the couch. Neither of them said much, until Luke broke the silence. I got an offer. Victoria turned to him slowly. From where an old client in Clearwater wants to invest in turning my little repair shop into something bigger. Expand. Bring on a few apprentices. It's good money. She nodded once. You thinking about it? He didn't answer right away. Then I'm thinking about what happens next. Victoria looked down. You're leaving. I haven't said that. You didn't have to. The fire cracked softly, its glow flickering across both their faces. I never planned to stay, he said. At least, not like this. It wasn't my world, she whispered. It became yours. It became something. But that doesn't mean I belong in it. You belong here. He turned to her, eyes searching. Do I, or do I just fit the story you've started to tell yourself? She blinked, stung. That's not fair. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Vic, I love you. God, I do. But love without place, without clarity, that's a hard thing to build a life on. She swallowed, her voice barely audible. I thought we were building something. We were, he said. We are. But I need to know it's not built on borrowed time. Victoria closed her eyes. Then slowly she stood and walked to the cabinet. She pulled out the envelope, the contract dissolution, then returned to him. I was supposed to sign this today, she said. It finalizes everything. We part quietly. No noise, no damage. Luke looked at the paper but didn't touch it. I didn't sign it, she added. His eyes lifted to hers. Because I was waiting, she whispered, for you to say it first, that you wanted to stay. Silence. Then Luke stood too. He reached out gently, took the envelope and set it on the mantel unopened. I don't care about the contract, he said. I care about us. But I won't stay unless you ask me with your whole heart. Not out of fear. Not because it's easier than letting go. Tears filled her eyes. I'm scared, she said. Scared that if I ask you to stay and it still falls apart, it'll mean I was never worthy of something lasting. Luke cupped her face with both hands. Victoria Hale, he said softly, you are the bravest person I've ever known. But you don't have to earn love. You just have to choose it. She broke. The tears came hot, unrelenting. And she didn't fight them this time. He held her, and they stood there wrapped in the ache of everything unsaid and everything that still could be. The next morning, Luke woke early. The sky was pale, the lake still silvered in mist. He walked out onto the porch, a mug of coffee in hand, heart heavy. He needed to think. But when he returned inside, a note was waiting for him on the kitchen counter. Luke, if love is a choice, then this is mine. Stay, not because you promised, not because it's easier, but because I don't want this house or this life or this version of myself without you in it. Come back to me. Not as part of a contract, as the man I love. He stared at it for a long time, and for the first time since he'd arrived in this place, he didn't feel like a temporary fixture. He felt like home. The air was charged, not with conflict, but with change, the kind that hums beneath the surface of quiet mornings, just before the sky decides whether to rain or shine. Victoria stood in the center of the kitchen, her hands cradling a coffee mug gone cold. The note she'd left for Luke the day before sat folded neatly on the counter. He hadn't said anything about it yet, but he hadn't left either. The silence of it all pressed in around her like fog. From the second floor came the sound of Emily's bare feet pattering across the hardwood. A moment later, she skipped into the room holding a paper crown she'd made from gold construction paper and sparkly stickers. Daddy says I'm in charge of breakfast today, she declared proudly. Victoria smiled. Oh, I see. So are we having pancakes or glitter for breakfast? Both Emily said without hesitation. Luke followed her into the kitchen wearing his usual flannel sleeves, pushed up hair still damp from the shower. He met Victoria's eyes over the rim of his own coffee mug, and something unspoken passed between them. They were no longer pretending, but that didn't mean the road ahead was clear. Later that afternoon, as Emily was at a play date and the house fell quiet again, Luke found Victoria on the back deck, curled up with a blanket and a book she wasn't really reading. He sat beside her without a word. The lake shimmered before them, still and endless. I read your note, he said finally. She didn't move. And I believe you, he said. Every word. Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the blanket, but she asked. Luke took a long breath. I'm being offered something in Clearwater. Something permanent. A shop. A future that makes sense for me. For Emily. For the life I built before all this. Victoria turned to him. You're leaving. He shook his head. No, I haven't made a decision yet, but I can't ignore what's being offered to me. Not just the business, but the clarity. Victoria bit her lip. And I'm the chaos. No, he said quickly. You're the wonder. But wonder and clarity don't always live in the same place. She looked away, jaw tense. So I'm a risk. You're a leap, he corrected. And I've been leaping since the day you asked me to sign that paper. Victoria stood unable to stay still. She paced the deck, emotions rising with each step. I don't want to be the thing that costs you your roots. And I don't want to be the man who makes you shrink your world just to keep me, he said gently. I've watched you become someone braver, softer, realer. I love that version of you. Not the one who hides in this house or behind her last name. She stopped walking. You love me. He stood too, crossing the space between them. I do. Her breath caught, but her eyes didn't waver. Then why does this still feel like goodbye? Luke reached for her hand, because sometimes love means letting someone go far enough to see what they'll choose on their own. That evening, they drove together to the community center's family fundraiser, the one Victoria had funded quietly long before she ever imagined she'd be the guest of honor. Inside the modest hall, the lights were soft, and the air was filled with the scent of baked goods and children's laughter. Emily ran ahead to join her art group while Victoria and Luke stood back, observing the life that could have been theirs long before money and press and contracts ever came into the picture. Parents greeted Luke with familiarity. Kids waved at Emily like she'd lived here her whole life. Victoria watched it all with an ache in her chest, this world so different from hers, yet now so deeply tied to her heart. The director of the center, a warm woman in her 50s named Carla, approached them with a wide smile. Victoria, I wanted to thank you. What you've helped us build, it's already changing lives. Victoria gave a small, genuine smile. It was Luke's idea. But it was your courage, Carla said. Money doesn't change lives. Intentional kindness does. As Carla moved away, Victoria turned to Luke. She's right, she said softly. You were the one who reminded me why I started this company in the first place. It wasn't for numbers. It was for people. Luke gave a small smile. You just needed someone to remind you that softness isn't weakness. She looked at him. And you needed someone to show you that love doesn't have to cost you everything you are. They stood in silence watching Emily at the craft table. I've been thinking, Victoria said at last, about where I belong and where you do. Luke waited. I don't want to chain you to my world, she continued, and I don't want to be a guest in yours. He looked over at her. So what are you saying? I'm saying, maybe it's not about where we're from or what we built. Maybe it's about where we start again as equals, as people. Not as CEO and single dad, just as us. Luke's throat tightened. Vic, I want that. Then tell me where we go. Not where I go. Not where you go. Where we go. He reached for her hand, fingers firm and sure. We start where we always should have, he said. Not from a contract, not from survival, but from the choice to walk into the unknown together. Victoria nodded, tears rising. Then let's walk. That night they returned home to find Emily asleep on the couch, her craft paper crown askew, a glitter star glued to her forehead. Luke carried her to bed while Victoria folded the little crown and placed it on the mantel. She glanced beside it. The contract dissolution still sat there unopened. She picked it up, ran her fingers along the seal, and then without hesitation she tore it in half. Luke returned in time to see her do it. She met his eyes. No more endings. He stepped forward. Only beginnings, he said. And this time when they kissed, it wasn't tender or tentative. It was homecoming. The kind you don't earn with signatures, but with the quiet decision to stay. Snow had fallen overnight, the kind of soft storybook snow that coated every branch and rooftop with quiet reverence. Clearwater looked like a painting come to life, chimneys smoking gently, children bundled in scarves, laughter echoing across the lake as someone pulled a sled down a gentle hill. Inside the kitchen of a modest home just 2 blocks from the water, the smell of cinnamon and cloves filled the air. A loaf of pumpkin bread rose in the oven. On the table, a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures stood beneath a house with a heart over the roof. The smallest one, labeled Emily, held hands with Daddy and V. Victoria ran her fingers over the paper, smiling. I'm thinking this should go in the dining room, she said, holding it up. Luke across the room looked up from where he was tightening a light fixture. I thought we said no glitter art in the dining room. Too late, she replied. It's already emotionally attached to the wall. He walked over and took the drawing from her, gently studying it for a moment. She gave us bigger smiles than the sun, he murmured. Victoria leaned into his shoulder. She says she likes drawing us happy. She says that's how she knows it's home. Luke wrapped an arm around her waist and kissed the top of her head. She's not wrong. 3 months had passed since they'd moved into the new house, smaller than the estate, but filled with more laughter, more dinners made together, more soft socks on hardwood floors, and midnight giggles from Emily's room. The contract was long gone. What remained were rhythms of real-life. Luke's mechanic shop now thriving with local apprentices. Victoria consulting part-time, using her voice for community-centered ventures instead of corporate dominance. Emily had joined the local dance class and insisted on wearing mismatched socks because art and love. It had stopped being something they tiptoed around. It lived in the way Luke always left the porch light on when Victoria worked late, in how she remembered the exact way he liked his eggs, in Emily's new bedtime routine that included 1 story, 1 hug, and 1 compliment for each other. Love was no longer the unknown. It was home. On a clear Saturday, the community center held its grand opening of the Morgan House of Light, a name Victoria had chosen quietly with reverence. The sign above the entrance was carved from cedar and painted by local artists. Below it, families gathered, some from wealth, most not waiting to see the inside of the center that promised resources for education, health, and healing. Victoria stood in front of the microphone, but this time she didn't wear heels or armor. Just a soft gray coat, a scarf Emily had chosen for her, and a truth she no longer needed to defend. When I first built companies, she began, I thought success looked like glass towers and market shares. But real legacy doesn't live in balance sheets. It lives in names whispered at bedtime, in warm meals, in someone saying you're safe here. She looked down at Emily, who beamed up at her from Luke's shoulders. This center is named for the two people who reminded me what light really is. Applause rippled through the crowd, and in the back, Luke's eyes shimmered. That night, as the fire crackled in their small living room, Victoria sat beside Luke on the couch. Emily curled up between them, half asleep. Do you remember, Victoria whispered, what you said to me the night I asked you to stay? Luke smiled. I said you didn't have to earn love. You just had to choose it. She turned toward him. You were right. But I think love chooses us too, when we least expect it, when we're not trying so hard to deserve it. He kissed her knuckles gently. I think love finds the ones who show up. She nodded. And stay. A pause. Then Emily stirred between them, mumbling, Did I miss the bedtime compliment? They both laughed. Victoria brushed hair from her daughter's face. You are the brightest light in every room you walk into, Luke added, and the best glitter artist on planet Earth. Emily grinned sleepily, eyes still closed. Okay, you win. As the snow fell quietly outside and the house glowed golden within, Luke and Victoria sat together, hands intertwined. Hearts settled to pass, finally quiet behind them. There was no contract, no clause, no pretending, just a man, a woman, and a little girl who had learned that love wasn't found in grand gestures or perfect plans. It was found in the staying, in the showing up, in the choosing again and again, every single day, and in a home that would never again need an exit clause. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Was there a moment in the story that touched your heart the most? If you enjoy meaningful, emotional stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with us today. Until next time, take care and keep kindness close.